everybody. We're back with another edition of the Cage Rage podcast. Today we're talking MMA, everybody's favorite, fastest growing sport in the world. I am here today with my friend and confidant, Miguel Iturrate, who's pretty in lilac today. He's trying to combat my pink. I think I look better than him. If you think so, leave a comment below. I don't think it's even a question. He might be prettier than me, but he doesn't look better than me in pink, and that's just a fact. It's just a natural fact. Hi, Miguel. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. How are you? Thanks for having me.
It's good to see you again. Everything okay in Costa Rica?
Yep, about 10 days out from this Conor McGregor fight, and that really is just kind of like the epicenter of the MMA world right now, isn't it?
That it is. Things have gone crazy in MMA. We've got DC and Lesnar. We've got all kinds of cool stuff coming up. But the fact is, you can't say MMA without saying Conor McGregor in the same sentence. So why don't we just spend 30 minutes talking about Conor McGregor and all of the different things that have happened for this fight in particular. And I'd like to cover a few different aspects of it, but let's start with take us through Conor McGregor, a year in the life of a guy after he fought Floyd Mayweather. Go.
The bottom line is I think he wound up number 4 on a list of athletes making money for the year. I think, they got him at about $100 million for the year, or just around there. Most of it made for that fight, obviously, with Mayweather. So you kind of got to take your hats off to the guy. The guy crossed over, whatever threshold that is. He did something that made a lot of money. Now, so we talked about last podcast, and makes him interesting is, if you copy the boxers that fought Mayweather, they all sort of, took the payday and kind of, fell off after that.
Yeah.
And McGregor is, at least putting on the show that there's not going to be a fall off, So he's back. Now he's clearly front and center, the main attraction, whereas with Floyd, you've got Floyd and his whole legend and everything there. But this fight with the Russian is very different. The bottom line is McGregor, he's got the backing of a nation, and there's a certain aspect of like his entourage. Like for example, like the throwing shit at a bus and stuff. McGregor was definitely the ringleader, but he's got his guys that follow him, and there's a little bit of an entourage there that's an X factor, and a lot of the interplay with him and Mayweather's entourage was, I think, done for the media. I think that they had discussed it earlier, and then early on, Mayweather said, look, I've been doing this for 20 years, and you got potential. I'm going to teach you everything. Behind the scenes, too, there were rumors that they'd flown together on planes, to certain locations and things like that. I don't even know if that's true or not, but it just hints at, I think there definitely was that, and I think, McGregor used it in his trash talk, where it's like, hey, I'm taking over kind of thing. That was very clearly the message, but I think that once you start with that message, you've given Mayweather his position. I think that Mayweather had his position there. This Russian doesn't, but this Russian's entourage is just a whole different ballgame, too. Mayweather, the Mayweather Mafia, or whatever you want to call it, is very real, but that comes with privilege, power, and certain things. I don't know that, the guys surrounding McGregor are maybe a little more street at this point. Mayweather's got a lot of lawyers and a lot of people who've made money and stuff, get to a certain good position, and he's been doing it for 20 years. So, at a certain extent, Mayweather hasn't been in the slums, for years, if he ever was, So, whereas McGregor comes from there still, and McGregor sort of has an embracement of that. Even the whiskey came out, the number 12 is, I think it's called Proper 12. 12 is a reference to his neighborhood, and in Ireland or wherever he comes from. So, he still believes in that. And I think, when you've got people with ties like that, the entourage has become a little bit, as a promoter, the entourage has become a little bit more of a headache and a worry. So now what happens is, now Nurmagomedov comes with his own entourage, which is, basically Chechens. And, I mean, it's...
Wait a minute. let's be clear. Great people, wonderful country, fabulous nation, representative of everything great of that particular style and brand of human being. But let's fill the audience in on what our particular experience is, specifically yours, with that particular brand or that area of the world, and give us a little background on what you know about that and sort of what culturally the differences are between, say, the Irish versus the Russians and the whole Eastern Bloc thing.
Well, I mean, just culturally, you're talking about two countries. You know, you throw Italy in there, and you throw the Jews and stuff in there, and you're talking about cultures that have put their own twist on what's the mafia. You know what I mean? And so there's certain aspects of that may play into this thing here. You know, there were talk of McGregor while he was off having a nightclub altercation with a legit Dublin, you know, gangster type of thing, and there was worry and concern. You know, I'm sure everything got smoothed over and they kept it all in house. It didn't get to be anymore, but that did make a blip on the news. So McGregor's got his connections and you know, who knows how much money is really moved, you know, betting on Conor, you know, or things like that. But that is, you know, where his bread and butter is. And the bottom line is the Irish, and to a certain extent, have that in their culture, that there are, you know, groups that are sort of outside the law or whatever like that, you know? And I think McGregor feeds off that. It's part of his image and things like that. But at some point, that also translates into guys that become hardcore, you know, he goes crazy, throws things at a bus. There's other guys there throwing hand trucks and things like that too. You know, those guys are following, and that's the whole entourage here. So it comes with some, you know, legitimate badasses, I think, and some people who you know, kind of, you know, are used to getting their own way kind of thing. And then you translate that, and you can almost use those exact descriptions for the Chechens that are around Nurmagomedov, I think. Talking about people who've come from a real rough last 30 years, you know what I mean? The Russians have tried to basically exterminate them, you know, with their army over there. The center of Grozny was, when this kid was growing up, was just shell-shocked. I mean, right. They've rebuilt it, but the way they've rebuilt it is a strongman is in place with ties to Moscow, and Moscow backs him, and he keeps everybody in line there. So he keeps people in line, and this is the guy who, you know, has the connections to move, you know, have people take over a lab and stuff like that. There have been allegations around Ruslan Chagayev, a Chechen boxer, you know, and steroids and things, and actually like things like his opponents testing positive for steroids and things. And his principal backer, the guy sitting in the purple luxury chairs at the events in Chechnya, is the president of the country. So, again, you know, powerful things can be united there, you know, for, you know, to back people up. Or there's also a confidence that comes that McGregor has, doesn't he? But doesn't McGregor have a confidence? Like, when he walks in a room, he knows that people got his back, you know? I mean, Nurmagomedov has that same strut, and I don't think, you know, so I think the clash of the entourages, for example, why does the UFC avoid a, you know, multinational tour? What are they going to do? New York, Los Angeles, Dublin, right, and Grozny? It's, you know, I would avoid it too. I think there's just too many X factors with the entourages, and even false entourages. I'm just talking about Irish idiot hooligan soccer type fans and the Russian equivalent of that are not really part of the entourage but are hangers on, and people who, you know, travel with the fighters and stuff like that. I think all those things are in play here, and that's why the UFC avoided, probably cost themselves some money, but avoided that whole worldwide media tour like they did with Mayweather. A lot of X factors in this one, whereas with Mayweather, I think everything's controlled. I think everything's under contract. I think, you know, down to they talked behind, this is what I think, and I don't know if this has been out there before or whatever, but, you know, there's always been a talk about Mayweather having trouble reading. You know, education-wise, it's always been a knock on him, and I mean, you know, he's defended himself at certain times. But I don't believe that McGregor bought that up in the trash talk on stage without that being in the contract somewhere, that there was an agreement that he could bring it up kind of as an escalation or at a certain moment. it was talked about because, you know, there are certain lines that you're trying to cross, and nowadays lawyers mind everything, and that could very well have been part of a contract. To just say it, maybe it happened that way, but I don't believe that anymore.
Well, look, here's the difference. We're talking MMA today, and we're not talking boxing, though. And you can really see the stark difference between boxing, like you said. Something like that would be contracted, whereas with MMA, you don't see that level of sophistication with the UFC yet. I think we're starting to, and that's not a knock on the UFC. It's just that they're younger. They haven't been around as long, and they're also, the UFC is the sport of MMA pretty much right now. You know, boxing is boxing. MMA is the UFC, and without the UFC, MMA sort of goes away at this point. And that's not the case with boxing. Boxing's going to be boxing whether Golden Boy is here or not, whether Don King is here or not. There's always another Don King. There's always another De La Hoya. There's going to be another promoter that's going to fill that spot. The same thing can be said of MMA, but no one's been able to do it yet and have any kind of real competition with the UFC. And what I'm getting at is that the UFC, they're developing their sophistication, and they're developing their fortress right now. They're putting a foundation in where they can really start to build and do something great now. And you know, they're sort of the NFL of MMA, and I think they're putting together a foundation that keeps them there. But having said that, they are anchored on something as crazy and unpredictable as a crazy Irish guy who's decided to get in the ring and fight a 50-0 boxer and develop his own brand of whiskey. And you know, he's a wild man, and I don't think that the whole bus incident was an act, the way that, like you said, maybe him talking about Mayweather being able to read was. So you know, what are your thoughts on that? Take us through. Let's talk about the bus act. In case somebody listening or viewing this right now has been in a void and they've been in a hole for the last 2 years, tell the audience a little bit about the bus act and catch everybody up on that first.
I mean, if the bus act, as you're asking, if the bus act was something that was contrived, that the UFC said, look, we're going to do this thing, we're going to get the media, at some point I think it went wrong for it, you know?
Yeah.
Because, you know, once you've got New York City police involved and stuff like that, then you're in a whole different ballgame. And at that point, you know, you saw McGregor show up in a suit and be very contrite and apologetic. You know what I mean? There was no bombastic screaming in people's faces and drinking whiskey in court. So he knew he was facing down something very real. Because even as stupid as something like 2 months jail time, you know. I mean, McGregor, he never in his mind conceived when he was throwing that thing that he might have to do jail time for doing that. And that I think that put a halt to it. I think if it was contrived, there was something that went wrong there when that became involved, you know? And the UFC, you know, maybe the UFC needed to tell the cops, you know, hey, we're going to do this. And they didn't. That's what was going on. And maybe it is a rookie move. I don't know. Here's the deal, though. The UFC, basically, I guess, you know, you can count different levels of success that they've had at certain points, you know?
Certainly.
Maybe the first big star, you know, Hoist was kind of like beyond the UFC, and he had his family and a name and a marketing thing. So he's kind of an independent star. But, like, was Tito Ortiz the first big star? You know,
I sure think so.
Was it Tank Abbott before him? So there was an escalation to Ortiz. You know, so at some point from Tito Ortiz, you get to Chuck Liddell, where definitely there was a jump. You know, Liddell was on talk shows and things like that, and, you know, passing out on TV, and at the end of the day, you know, really making millions of dollars. You know what I mean? So there was an escalation to Liddell, and then where do you go from there? Was it Rousey and then McGregor? Because it really, you know,
I think you can put Chael. I think you can put Chael in there too, for sure. You know, but regardless. Yeah, you know, Chael may be one of those in between guys between Rousey and McGregor, and I think that might be the 5 biggest stars that they put out, right? Well, so, and here's the thing: we've kind of been bouncing off this idea of trash talk, and Chael sort of came in and started to perfect that for the UFC and show fighters in the UFC that, look, if you want to do this, you have to really be good on the mic. You have to sell your personality, not just your fists. And then, you know, McGregor came in and just took that to a completely different level. He was primal, and at the same time, he was sophisticated. He was nationalistic, and he was brilliant, and he was articulate, and he could be articulate at a street level. He was able to do all of the things that Chael sort of faked his way through and did a good job from practicing and watching a lot of wrestling shows. McGregor just feels real when he does that. So, like, I think what you're alluding to with the bus is that when McGregor picked the dolly up and threw it through the window of the bus, I think you're right. I don't think he had any idea that was going to wind up being something that he was going to have to face court over, and that it was going to be a situation. Now it sold a lot of tickets and it sold pay-per-views ultimately, I believe. I think it will. And maybe that's why they've been able to back off of this a little bit, is because he's gotten so much coverage from that. But either way, we haven't said hardly anything about the Chechnyans, so let's talk about the Chechnyans some.
Well, first, I think what happened with McGregor is that the UFC kind of said, whoa, he screwed up New York police, this is a lot. And they kind of let him, you know, see how he does. And the fact is he acquitted himself quite well. He showed up in court, did the right thing, and now they're doing business again. You see, so they kind of had that little bit of a chance of separation, but McGregor has conducted himself, you know, the proper way. I think at this point, see, this is the thing is and you alluded to experience with Russians and Chechens and things like that. And I didn't roll my eyes when I said his entourage is Chechen, you know, with anything but respect for them. They're an old culture. It's just, it's not the same as our culture. So these guys are living in the south of Russia in the mountains. Now, this is the mindset of most Russians, the white Russians from north of Russia, you know, the blue-eyed types, the blonde types that, you know, you associate. The Slav race is Russians, and now when they made the USSR, they grabbed a bunch of other countries. So Chechens, they have a different language, they're racially different, and things like that. And the bottom line is the northern Russians refer to them knowing how ugly the N-word is for a white person to say it to a black person in the States. They mimic that, saying, well, the white person says it because they hold the other person less. Well, these guys from the South are less, let's call them that. It literally is that base. They don't like us. So the Chechens are very independent. They're not Russians at all. Really, when they come down to it, they're very proud. So here's what I think. I think they're in a situation where they've been kind of oppressed and things like that. And Nurmagomedov is a guy who should be a superstar over there in terms of, you know, becoming a world star. How many other Chechen world stars can you name, you know, besides, or you know, from Kazakhstan you have Golovkin, you have athletes that are coming out, and this kid is the first one from there, so he becomes kind of an iconic guy there. And all I'm saying is that there are going to be enough people around there that are going to say, do not fuck with the Chechens. You know what I mean?
For sure.
There's going to be lines that you don't want to cross with those guys. You know, the little hat thing is indicative of, you know, a military special forces background and stuff. And like I said, that freaking city was a war zone. So, like, it's not like those guys are not really hardcore people. You know what I mean? That have lived a real hardcore life. So McGregor, you know, can come in and be bombastic, throw bottles of water. Like, the Diaz brothers are very real too. But at that point, you're talking about, you know, kind of a street kind of, you know, kind of Latino street, you know, Los Angeles, not Los Angeles, I'm sorry, Northern California, very much their own mindset, very proud. They clash with McGregor real well. Now there you have a nice war of entourages. I think the Chechens and McGregor both also have an escalation of their entourages that could be very serious, and the UFC wanted no part of that. So hopefully everything goes good. I don't think it's dangerous or anything like that, but I'm just saying that both guys, you can see it in the confidence they bring. Both guys know they have back. The people have their back.
Right. Yeah. You know, you said like 5 things I really want to touch on there, but I'll leave it for another time. But one thing I do want to touch on at a later date, just for the record, we need to talk about Nate Diaz, Nick Diaz, Conor McGregor. what happens there. There's a fight there somewhere that has to happen. It has to happen next, and it's an enormous sale. And that's your year of build-up. That's your trash talk. That's the one that sells, your million pay-per-views and sets all the records in the UFC. But having said that, let's talk a little bit about the idea that the Chechens are literally living in a war zone, and so that's sort of bred. Nagornogov is sort of the kind of guy who would come from that sort of a background. And he has that feel where there's an intensity and a realness to him that maybe McGregor, the argument could be certainly made that McGregor could be getting soft based on his fame and his fortune, whereas the curly-haired Chechen's not necessarily that way. I don't believe that myself, but I've heard that postulated here and there. What are your thoughts on that? What do you think's what's going through his head right now? Where's the training at? Where are these guys at in terms of how they're going to approach one another when the cage door closes?
All right, I think McGregor's going to have a game plan. I don't know what that is. I don't want to, I can guess, but I think he's going to obviously want to stand up. I think he's going to want to back up, and I think he's going to want to counterfight while the Russian comes at him. At the end of the day, the Russian comes at him like a TIE fighter, which means he doesn't have the side-to-side motion of a real slick boxer, and when he gets hit, if he gets hit, he may wind up backing straight up instead of, again, moving side to side to try to, or clinching or doing some of the other things. So that's his best shot at winning, and McGregor has got 5 rounds to set that up and play with that. So wear the guy out, annoy him, do certain things. I don't want to say like when Nick Diaz lay down on Anderson Silva, but, what a great moment that was, right? But, do something to get in the guy's head, make him, press a little more. He comes out for round 3, round 4, a little disgruntled. He's going to charge a little more. He's going to be just a little bit more susceptible to that counterpunch. So That's kind of what I think McGregor's game plan is going to be. I think McGregor, we mentioned it in the last podcast, his precision is what gets him by in these situations. I think he's got a guy that, is going to come straight forward at him. So that's going to be interesting. So for McGregor, the game plan's there. I think the training and everything, he's going to be physically ready. He's going to be everything like that because he's back. And I think he wants to avoid the talk that he's going to be, coming back fat or coming back soft or coming back in any way, shape, or form. He's coming back $100 million richer, but seems to be putting out the signs that he's back, like looking for the next $100 million. It's not like he's saying, all right, So and that I think makes a little bit of a difference. Now, Nurmagomedov, all of that, and this may be the difference between the two guys too. Essentially as human beings, no knock on either guy, but maybe what makes them different is I think Nurmagomedov has nothing else he's really doing except preparing to smash this guy. And he's back to basics. He's doing whatever it is he's doing. If it means wearing the wig and nothing else, running in the mountains in Chechnya like he hasn't done for 8 years, he's back. He's doing whatever it takes to be hungry and to be at his sharpest. But all he knows is in the ring. He doesn't have a brand of whiskey. He doesn't have, he's going to pull more money for this, and then he's going to come back to a UFC contract where he's never going to make this kind of money again. That's his lot in life. Unless I'm wrong and something changes or whatever, and he runs off and makes $150 million. But I don't think Nurmagomedov is that crossover charisma guy.
Certainly not.
You were talking about the bottom line is at the moment where I just had to smile and say, McGregor, wow, I forget who he beat, but he knocked the guy out, and he called it. He grabbed the mic and he said, I want to take a second to apologize to absolutely nobody.
Right.
And I just, you had to take your hat off to the guy at that point, what I mean? And since then, he's been, I worry about him getting stale, he has that a couple of things that have been repetitive. Is it going to be the same show after 2 years and stuff like that? But, he's now coming with a little bit of that privilege, the tailored suits and stuff, that's him now, It's not like, they put the monkey in the suit for the world tour and stuff like that. It's become a part of his personality that kind of aiming towards I don't know what you want to call it, a prestige life. The watches, the whole upper crusty kind of aim he has, like the kid from the streets getting there. That's what he really wants. You know what I mean? He has all that on his mind, and that's what he brings to this fight. So that should get him through the whole thing. Momentum, he's hoping will get him through it, and he runs over the guy. This guy's just another step. Nurmagomedov, he's in the biggest fight. This is the biggest fight of his life. There is no bigger fight after this.
Yeah, I mean, if he loses this fight, where does he go? You know what? It doesn't matter where he goes, because the only place he can go is into obscurity. If McGregor loses this fight, he goes, I lost that one, but I've got more interesting things to do. I'll beat him later, and he can go do something else. I mean, depending on how the fight goes, obviously.
Well, at the end of the day, McGregor just signed an 8-fight deal, so at some point he's going to be at the UFC's command. You know what I mean? Now, whatever exits and little things are in the contract, I don't know. No one knows at this point. Details aren't out there. But, it wouldn't be a surprise if 3 fights into the contract, Pacquiao beats Mayweather at the end of this year, as there's rumors that they're going to fight again.
Yeah.
The Pacquiao rumor comes up with Pacquiao and McGregor again. And he banks another $100 million. Would the UFC allow that in this new contract? Of course they're going to allow it. They already did. So, yeah, he's got X factors. Well, here's what happens, too, is at this point, there's some good fighters, obviously, at 155 pounds, but if you look at the division, right, the best names, you got Nurmagomedov, you got Eddie Alvarez, the former champion, you got, Dustin Poirier, who's still up and coming and stuff like that. And that's starting to look like a list of, Conor McGregor victims, Who could this even bother coming back for? So, what Nurmagomedov do coming off a loss is he probably goes back in and probably beats up Eddie Alvarez. You know what I mean? But the belt is going to be left. I'm an Eddie fan, so I don't mean it like bad against him.
Right.
He's a tall order for Eddie. But I think if you put the next 2 guys in to take a vacated belt and move McGregor off into George St. Pierre land, then that's probably the way the UFC will go with off of McGregor win.
I just want to say I hate the snore St. Pierre. I don't want to see anything that has to do with that. It's the most boring, passive fight that you could pick. I don't want to see anything that has to do with him. I've never understood the draw. I understand that he's a great fighter. We've watched him since he was very young, way before he ever signed a UFC contract, and he's a great guy. I don't have anything but respect for him as a human being and as a fighter. But as a fan, that's not really the fight that I want to see. His last 6 fights have been just absolute snore fests in my mind. McGregor needs to pick fights where fans are going to be titillated, and he's going to have real shots at putting people on the canvas. The Alvarez fight, there was a lot of speculation. Can he stand up with Alvarez? Eddie's such a great wrestler, etc., etc. But you were looking at a size difference that was the proportions were so far off that there was just no way Eddie was going to be able to do that. And you really had to start asking yourself, maybe Eddie's in a weight class too high for his frame. And I think you're starting to see a whole bunch of that question again. And we're going to have to see, in my mind, probably another weight class come through. Obviously, that's another topic for another day as well. But it's something to think about. What are your thoughts on who are the best fighters out there that are not in necessarily Conor's weight class that he could fight next?
St. Pierre is the elephant in the room. And I know that you declared it boring and stuff, and I think a lot of people would be on your side with that. But the bottom line is that St. Pierre is the Hall of Fame guy here too. That he's beyond where McGregor is in his career. And if you look at it, you said we've known him since early on. I mean, the bottom line with St. Pierre is he probably had 10 fights before getting to the UFC. And in those 10 fights, he probably fought 5 UFC level dudes. You know what I mean? He always looked for tough fights, and when he was with the UFC, and he got his, when you remember him begging for the shot at the world title and stuff like that. So he's always wanted to challenge himself and get to the point where he is now. So now where he is, he's smart. You know, in his trash talk, it was very revealing. When he got exasperated with Diaz, he told him, he goes, "You're an idiot." You know, it's like, I've been making money and stuff like that, and you haven't even paid your taxes. You know what I mean? Basically, kind of like frustrated with the guy because St. Pierre has his stuff in order, including being able to walk away from the UFC, come back on his own terms, manage the things he's done. Right now, he's not popular with the UFC, but if you put him in with McGregor, the pay-per-view value is so explosive that the UFC is going to forget that St. Pierre, marches to the beat of his own drum. He sometimes gives them little bits of a headache, especially if you start talking about steroids and things like that. But I think the payment for him and that, who else could you do? Other people in other weight classes and stuff. I wonder if Anderson Silva is still, functional, or even, how big can McGregor? Only because at some point you're just looking at common opponents with Nick and Nate Diaz, and those are the fights that you want to set up. I think Nick could be the big fight. Nick is an X factor because I very much wonder if Nick's ever going to fight again. At some point he may find himself saying, "Look, I'm short some money. I can use another big payday. How much is the offer nowadays? All right, another few million. Man, I could use that." And maybe he gets himself psyched up, to do it. I don't know, but I think there's a very real possibility we don't see Nick Diaz again.
Okay, so let me get this straight. You're saying that Diaz is out of fighting by his own choice, that he's, all politics aside and legalities aside and commission aside, you're saying that if Diaz could fight right now without any issues, that he probably wouldn't? Nick, of course.
Look, if all things were perfect, but that's the thing is, I think he's a guy that at this point, with the amount of time he's taken off, and you're throwing up on 4 years or whatever, you're in a situation there where I think he's in everything has to fall into place for him to fight well. You know what I mean? For example, what if he comes back and says, "Hey, I'm into a world tour though," and they want to do the world tour with him and Conor or whatever it is. So he's a guy that I think a lot of that stuff happens. He said he's an interesting personality because I think he's very real. I think when he comes across sometimes he comes across as antisocial or whatever in some of his media interviews and stuff like that. But I think it's just that you're taking a very real dude from the streets of Compton or wherever. I know he's not from Compton, but from where he's from. Fuck, I forgot where he's from in Northern California, but you know what I mean? It's like they're very much from there. You take a kid from there and put him in the limelight and stuff like that, and he's a little stressed out, and but he's endearing to a very the people that like the underdog, and that's what he represents. So, but it's the same thing where he does triathlons because he likes to. So if you don't give him the right fight and you ask him to come back and fight, I don't know who
Conor McGregor. Conor McGregor.
If you're asking to fight McGregor with the money and things and with all the other things that are going to go around that, I think you would have to consider it. But I think if you ask him, say, to come back to the rotation on a 6-fight deal, I don't know that you get him to the table.
No, I don't think that happens, but I think prize fighting he does all day long. I think probably the only reason that he hasn't come back to fight is because he hasn't been offered the right fight. And McGregor is the right fight for him. Can you imagine the build-up, the tour for that, the trash talk, the genuine continuity that flows through both of those guys' veins all day long? They're both street-level guys at some level. Both of those guys are from the street, and they'll always be of the street. And that's what's so appealing about them. They're genuine. They're both made of granite, and I don't know. I think that's the fight I want to see more than anything else that the UFC can offer me. And I'm really shocked that that's not been on anybody's lips. I just haven't heard that. I've heard a lot of, well, what about Nate? But and I guess maybe that's kind of it. Well, he's still got to go through his little brother first. But in my eyes, that's not the money fight.
Here's the thing. This is where you're in the UFC's world. The bottom line is I think at this point, Nick, I think he's been released from his UFC contract. I think you'd have to consider him a free agent.
Yeah.
It's been. I know when they get suspended, the contract could tie them up until the suspension's over and then return for a certain period of time or whatever. But it's been almost 4 years since we've seen him in the ring, and I'm sure when there were allegations he was beating up his girlfriend and things like that came out in the news that were negative, that they were ready to write him off. They're already not banking on him for years, right? So McGregor just signed an 8-fight deal, and it's been a couple of years. We know he did the Mayweather fight with permission from the UFC. The UFC probably has hooks all over him because of being able to fight, because he held their belts and stuff like that. So even though he was a champion, he was maybe never a legit free agent, right? But there's, you've got Oscar De La Hoya, who's a boxing promoter who supposedly has $300 million in his war chest, and he wants to delve into MMA, and the best idea this guy has is to rematch Chuck Liddell and Tito Ortiz in a geriatric fight. Meanwhile, you have to ask yourself, was there a window to do McGregor versus Nick Diaz outside of the UFC that we just missed when he signed this contract?
Yeah, that's a very good point, and there's a lot of legitimate things.
There's no promoter that had the balls to make the offer and do it. Dana would. You could, knock Dana or whatever, but if Dana had been in a position and somebody bigger was operating over there and he had a chance at grabbing two names of that quality, he would have jumped all over that. He made a $500 million offer to Anthony Joshua, right? And then realized, in the UFC, I can do what I want because I own 700 fighters. Yeah. In boxing, it's very different because everybody's owned by somebody, and I just don't have a roster. So I'll have this guy, but who do I put him in against, So boxing matchmaking proved to be something that he's going to have to go back and rethink how he enters into the sport. But he's been looking at always doing those types of big things. But there's no competition, or else right there may have been a window of opportunity. Someone working the phones. Hey, Nick, you don't got a contract? Hold off. Let's see what we can do. Let me talk to Conor's people. Hey, Conor, so you're about to sign with the UFC. Why don't we do one big one-off? Is there any way we can work that out? Are you free? And then if not, maybe you have to chop the UFC into it. Maybe that's the way. But then again, there's no one operating on that level, and that's kind of one of the things that's missing.
Well, listen, we're at the end of our time for the day, but I think probably one of the things we're going to tackle on our next MMA podcast, the Cage Rage podcast, the MMA version of that will probably be, we're going to have to at some point talk about Tito and Chuck. And we've got some really old footage from pre-Tito and Chuck fight days, some video footage of us sitting in a gym talking to Tito about that upcoming fight before the fight was actually even scheduled, just when sort of the rumors started to happen. So stay tuned and stay in touch for that one, because that'll be that's going to be something that's probably going to break some ground, and the Cage Rage podcast is probably going to get a lot of hits for that one. Tell us what you think about things below. There's a comment spot. Go ahead and hit us on that. You can find us on Facebook. You can find us on Twitter. You can email us at Chadillac, that's Chadillac, Chadillac at thecageragepodcast.com, Miguel at thecageragepodcast.com. You can find us on Facebook, etc., and so forth. You know how to do it. You know how to do all that stuff. Find us on there. Final words on Conor McGregor and the idea that what he's going to do afterwards, what he's doing right now, whatever. What are your final thoughts on this before we wrap up, Miguel?
Well, I think we're going to talk about Conor, for the next couple of podcasts. So, we'll see how he gets the job done this fight with Nurmagomedov. The bottom line is the guy's shown himself to be a cat. So even if, he takes a beating, he's probably going to land on his feet. And, we'll see what we get, what aspect of we get. But you look at a guy who I think is firmly focused on the next $100 million he's going to make. He's not sitting pat saying I'm satisfied. and that makes him interesting in an X Factor and definitely someone to watch. One other little tease for the future podcast. My man set us up there with a conversation about Tito Ortiz, and I know Tito pretty well. I met Tito at Tito's first UFC fight when he made his debut. He fought 2 fights that night. He fought Wes Albritton, and then he fought Guy Mesger, and it's from there that a bunch of the rumors, or rather feuds in the future with the Ken Shamrock and Lions then come from. But Tito kind of went away after that one debut fight, and he went away for a couple years, and he came back. Oddly enough, before he came back to actually fight, he came back as the corner and training partner of John Lober, and Lober was set to do his rematch with Frank Shamrock. A rematch of a pancrase fight where Lober had taken it to Frank. They were doing it in the UFC, and Frank really fucked him up. It was the main event of the UFC's first time in Brazil. And Tito was along with Lober down in Brazil, kind of as part of his entourage and stuff like that. And I met him down there again, and I remembered him from having met him when he fought and stuff. So from there, we kind of hung around in probably, the next 20, 25 UFCs, with the group and stuff. So I can tell a lot of stories about Tito Ortiz. It's going to be fun.
Yeah, we'll have a good time with that. I'll try and get the editing done on that. Our editor, Aaron Kane at Kane Editing, he takes care of that kind of stuff for us.
Killer Kane!
Killer Kane! Killer Kane. We like that. So, yeah, Killer Kane podcast, or Killer Kane editorial podcasting. He's coming at you live. He's a bad man, folks, watching. Hey, so this is Chadillac signing out. This has been the Cage Rage podcast number 3. No, wait a minute. This has been the Cage Rage podcast number 4. We're grateful to have you guys. Please let us know what you think about things. Send us your emails and comment below. Tell us what you think. Tell us what you want to talk about. We've got a combined knowledge of almost 50 years in MMA, boxing, combat sports, wrestling, etc., and so forth. So we have the ability to bring everything to you in ways that we don't feel like a lot of other people are going to be able to. We're doing a lot of stuff that we don't see a lot of other podcasts doing. And the reason we're doing it is because we're trying to fill a vacuum that needs to be filled. And that vacuum is, what do the fans want? And whatever the fans want, that's what we need to deliver. And that's what we're here to do. So tune in. Let us know what you think. And we'll be around. We'll do some T-shirt giveaways and stuff like that coming up pretty soon. Anything else, Miguel?
Now, have fun out there. You can check out thesweetscience.com for boxing news. You can check out my boxing commentary at theboxingchannel.com. And that's basically it for another podcast in the can.
Done. In 3, 2, 1, and in 3, 2. Oh, Jesus fucking Christ. 2, 1. Hello again, everybody. Welcome back to the Cage Rage podcast. I'm your host, Chadillac. We're talking MMA on the Cage Rage podcast here today with my good buddy and confidant, Miguel Iturrate. In Costa Rica. Miguel, how's it going? What's up?
Zick ahead! How you doing, Chad?
2, 1.